All right, so we're actually going to dive into our first case study now. So this is Google's Project Maven that was kickstarted at the end of 2017 with the Department of Defense, with the goal of using Google's artificial intelligence in order to make the drone data more accurate for the military. And so this was the first time Google was really diving into a project that was in the business of war, and so they had decided to keep that information relatively close to the senior leadership, and so there was not information spread within the company. But by January 2018, this project information had begun to spread, and then by April, actually, there were 4,000 employees that signed a petition saying not only that the contract needs to be terminated, but that there also needs to be a code of ethics that is created for Google and puts a line in the sand of not engaging in any type of business of war. And so this actually wound up not being approved, and 12 senior engineers wound up leaving Google. And not only that, by June, the contract wound up lapsing, and it was meant to grow into a $250 million contract. And so this wound up leaving not only $250 million on the table, but of course wound up losing really senior talent, as well as leaving some pretty deep scars in terms of the enterprise culture and the values of the organization. So, from an outside perspective, this kind of leaves us wondering, how could this possibly happen? And so it's worthwhile to now dive into the risk innovation landscape and see if we can kind of map out what were some of the orphan risks at play, what did Google overlook, and see if we can kind of dig into what some of those key areas can be. So on the left, what you'll see are the stakeholders, and underneath them, the little plus signs, which represent the values for those relevant stakeholders. And then on the bottom, you'll see the different categories of orphan risks. So social and ethical factors, unintended consequences of emerging technologies, and organizations and systems. And then what we do is map out the orphan risks that are respective to those stakeholders and those categories, and are able to get a risk landscape that looks something like this. And this is specifically for the Google Maven case study. And so when you look at this map, what you're able to see is, if we're just looking at the top row, this would be covering what the enterprise culture really values. So doing the right thing, fostering a culture of reputation, and also being able to attract and retain top talent. And so these were some of the areas that were really threatened by this Google Maven project. And so not only the ethics internally to the company, but also their perception and their worldview. Being able to uphold the organizational values and culture, and also maintain the reputation and trust of Google itself, as well as the standards. And so you can go through and see what the different areas are that matter to the different groups on the left. But something that's really notable and salient to this risk landscape is seeing what's missing. And so when you look at that middle column, there are no orphan risks and the unintended consequences of emerging technologies. And that's because Google did a really good job thinking through what can threaten the technology itself. So there was no issue with the quality of the artificial intelligence, or whether or not it was following the right regulations and the standards. And that's because they're a technology company and often are really good at thinking through the technology side of the risks. And so by using this kind of risk landscape, it allows you to step outside what you're maybe normally thinking about. So in Google's case, it would be the unintended consequences of emerging technologies, but also being able to see the broader landscape of what could you be missing in the social and ethical factors in the organizations and systems that run just the same level of risk in terms of being able to derail you or your enterprise, but are often overlooked. And so with that, we can now dive into our next case study, and we'll see you there.